In the Third Reich, perpetrators did not just follow orders, they turned sadism into a calculated profession. They transformed clinical medicine into a precision instrument of torture. The horror began with physical trophies. Camp personnel harvested human skin. Physicians conducted lethal experiments on living children. Tanned human tissue covered office desk lamps. The top leaders of the regime dominated the international newspaper headlines. Meanwhile, a shadow network of anonymous clerks and clinical doctors executed the actual genocide. Coldly, technically. Cruelty was never spontaneous here. The government standardized it. Entire civil institutions mutated into a synchronized death machine. Architecture evolved into a tool of mass extermination. Bureaucracy optimized the daily kill quotas. This machinery demanded highly educated minds. The SS integrated over 100,000 degreed professionals directly into its terror apparatus. Doctors, corporate lawyers, and civil engineers drafted the blueprints of annihilation. To keep the extermination network running without interruption, graduates from the most prestigious European universities calculated the strict logistics of mass murder. They applied absolute scientific rigor to human slaughter. After the fall of the regime, international prosecutors mapped out this vast administrative structure. The Allies convened exactly 12 subsequent military tribunals in Nuremberg to judge these specific professionals. How do you force an ordinary engineer to design gas chambers? Create a system of career incentives. To maintain this efficiency, the SS main office built an entirely new organizational culture in 1942. They introduced a strict KPI system for mass murder. The state treated violence as a corporate ladder. The SS main economic and administrative office viewed concentration camps as profit centers, with rigid quotas for mortality and production. Sadism became a measurable metric. Conventional professions underwent a macabre transformation. An architect sat at a drafting table. He calculated the exact heat loss of a wooden barrack to guarantee a specific percentage of deaths from hypothermia. An engineer refined the ventilation systems. He needed to kill more people using fewer resources. The metallic click of a stopwatch recorded the operation time of a gas chamber. Time was money. Medical doctors advanced their scientific careers through vivisections. A camp commandant who eliminated more prisoners than expected received immediate bureaucratic rewards. Commendations, promotions, special privileges. They did not merely follow orders, they chased performance bonuses. Decades later, the Nuremberg trials exposed this exact psychological machinery. The grotesque hid behind pure technocracy. A commandant could secure a permanent transfer to a luxury estate simply by reaching his monthly extermination quota, 100,000. To make an engineer strive for execution bonuses, the regime had to rewrite his psychological baseline from the school desk. The SS deployed a strict protocol for morality detachment. Instructors deleted human empathy through rigorous daily training. Cruelty became a primary metric of loyalty. Officers learned to process extermination as a basic sanitary procedure. A technical requirement. No emotion. This programming started early. Joseph Goebbels turned the primary classroom into an ideological assembly line. The concept of the Untermensch anchored the standard biology curriculum. Teachers taught racial taxonomy instead of hatred. The smell of fresh printing ink lingered on millions of standardized school textbooks. The pages displayed precise charts for measuring Aryan skulls, calipers, bone ratios, facial angles. State educators classified pity as a genetic defect. By the end of 1933, over 2 million Hitler Youth members memorized these parameters. 10 years later, those same schoolboys applied these exact protocols on the selection ramps of the Eastern death camps. The psychological conditioning held firm. The SS soldier chambered a round, shot the target, and logged the expenditure of ammunition. This precise technical approach allowed Karl Brandt to launch the T4 program, the first assembly line of death, camouflaged as public health. Before the war, eugenics remained a purely academic debate. Alfred Pletz and Ernst Rudin built the theoretical framework. They categorized human beings as the genetic ballast of German society. But theory demanded practical application. Karl Brandt engineered the system. The headquarters operated from Tiergartenstrasse 4, a flawless bureaucratic machine without a single bullet. Gray transport buses collected patients from provincial psychiatric clinics. The paperwork had to cover the tracks perfectly. A physician sat at a heavy wooden desk. He pulled a stack of standard death certificates. His hand mechanically stamped the seal of natural causes on form after form. Right next door, the execution process ran on schedule. A sharp, heavy hiss of opening gas valves pierced the clinical quiet. Pure carbon monoxide flooded the sealed experimental rooms. The stamping never stopped. The regime eliminated 70,000 people with disabilities under strict medical quotas. This was a medical bureaucratic test run for the Holocaust. The logistical scheme of the T4 program forged a seamless operational chain of transport, medical selection, gas deployment, and crematoria. Architects later scaled up this exact blueprint for the Auschwitz extermination camps. Medical staff learned to process human lives as industrial waste. Then, the official operations abruptly ceased. Program T4 established a strict blueprint. Concentration camps transformed into bottomless supply chains. They provided endless biological material for researchers like Sigmund Rascher. Where did the victims' organs go after the Dachau experiments? Straight into the laboratories of leading universities. While Joseph Mengele selected subjects on the arrival ramps, Sigmund Rascher ran technical trials. He operated low-pressure chambers. Prisoners faced simulated extreme altitudes. Rapid cerebral embolisms killed them. Medical clerks reduced the physical agony to dry clinical data. The extraction process prioritized the biological yield. Skeletons, brains, and intact organs left the camps in wooden crates. Freight trains routed the shipments directly to the elite German academic system. The Kaiser Wilhelm Institute for Brain Research received hundreds of specimens from the extraction zones. Administrators processed the human remains using standard invoices. Bills of lading, inventory tags, routine academic deliveries. Decades after the war, multiple academic institutes still kept these exact anatomical preparations in their active laboratories. A scalpel opens the calf. An assistant pulls the muscle back. Then comes the contamination. Dirt, rusty shavings. Forceps methodically pack wood and glass into bleeding muscle tissue. The fragments crunch under pressure. Finally, the syringe delivers the payload, a concentrated dose of Clostridium perfringens, the primary pathogen behind gas gangrene. The military dictated this exact mechanism. By the winter of 1941, the Eastern Front lost tens of thousands of soldiers not to bullets, but to severe bacterial infections. Shrapnel wounds festered in the frozen mud. Colossal mortality from gangrene paralyzed the German medical corps. The army demanded immediate chemical countermeasures. They required strict surgical protocols to test new sulfonamide drugs. While universities cataloged the anatomical shipments from Rascher, the Ravensbrück camp operated as a clinical testing ground for the front. Karl Gebhardt took command. He led the German Red Cross. Fritz Fischer served as his chief assistant. Together, they engineered the infection protocols. Healthy Polish women became their raw material. The operation strictly followed bureaucratic medical standards. Fritz Fischer stands over the operating table. He pedantically records blood pressure and pulse in a standardized medical journal. Beside him, Gebhardt works the open wound. He rubs the infected glass shards deep into the sterile incision. The tissue blackens. The muscle rots. Fischer calmly logs the fever spikes and necrosis expansion into the official reports. The doctors translated absolute cruelty into dry administrative data. A post-war tribunal handed Fischer a life sentence at Nuremberg. But the legal system rapidly adjusted its own verdicts. The authorities quietly commuted the punishment. In 1954, Fischer walked out of the prison gates and resumed his civilian medical career. How much did it cost to cripple dozens of people? just 5 years in prison. Back in that same Ravensbrück laboratory, Herta Oberhäuser sat literally at the next table from Fischer. She meticulously filled out her clinical reports. She represented a statistical anomaly. The SS medical hierarchy remained strictly male. Yet Nuremberg prosecutors convicted her as the only female doctor. Not for healing, for systematic destruction. The methodology required clinical detachment. No anesthesia, no painkillers, just scalpel blades and strict protocols. Oberhäuser performed vivisections on conscious inmates. She extracted intact bone sections. She severed live nerve endings. A sharp, caustic chemical smell filled the unventilated room. She injected experimental toxins directly into the open, bleeding muscle tissue. She watched the tissue rot. Then she picked up her fountain pen. While the victims writhed on the operating table, she translated their raw human agony into neat, dry columns of data, a daily routine. The courtroom exposed the contrast. Jadwiga Jido, a Polish survivor, stood before the Nuremberg tribunal. She stepped forward. She exposed her deeply mutilated legs to the judges. Jagged scars, missing calves, destroyed motor functions. Right next to her, prosecutors read dry, bureaucratic paragraphs detailing the precise surgical removal of those specific nerves from a fully conscious patient. The living, breathing trauma clashed with the cold, sterile paperwork. The judges handed down a 20-year sentence. Oberhäuser served exactly 5. She walked free. She resumed a quiet medical practice in West Germany. She wrote prescriptions. She examined local citizens. The system protected her until a former camp victim recognized her face, forcing officials to strip away her license. She offered 0 apologies. She died in 1978. The clinical journals of Oberhäuser and Fischer landed on the prosecution desks during the Nuremberg doctors' trial in 1946. The proceedings stretched into 1947. The tribunal faced a fundamentally broken system. Punishing the perpetrators was not enough. The court had to engineer a permanent legal patch to fix a catastrophic ethical failure. They drafted the Nuremberg Code. The new framework consisted of exactly 10 rigid points. Point number 1 restructured modern medicine by legally mandating the absolute necessity of voluntary informed consent from any human subject. The judges codified basic humanity into a strict procedural checklist. But the justice system compromised. The written rules demanded absolute compliance. The actual verdicts offered shocking leniency. Judges handed down remarkably short prison terms to multiple convicted physicians. Several key architects of the medical atrocities evaded capture entirely. They simply dissolved back into post-war society. The Nazi doctors generated mountains of clinical paperwork. They recorded every physiological reaction, yet the findings meant nothing. Their data held 0 scientific value. The Nuremberg trials exposed more than just medical atrocities. They revealed the administrative core of the slaughter. Investigators found lampshades stitched from human skin. They cataloged bookbindings made of human leather. The evidence pointed to clinical psychopaths. The reality was colder. Ordinary professionals manufactured these objects. Normal people. The system relied on the precise mechanics of moral disconnection. First, state paperwork erased the humanity of the victims. Then, the regime rewarded cruelty with career privileges. Finally, the unimaginable morphed into a standardized daily routine. The extermination machine did not run on blind sadism. It ran on the bureaucratic detachment of everyday clerks. While the front lines demanded violent fanaticism, the death camps required meticulous managers who could optimize the logistics of murder without a single hesitation. Franz Stangl commanded the Sobibor and Treblinka extermination camps. He did not execute prisoners with his own hands. He managed the process. The dry rustle of administrative papers filled his quiet office. He sat at a wooden desk, calmly reviewing transport manifests and signing documents to approve the daily extermination quotas. Thousands of lives vanished with one stroke of black ink. He felt no anger. He felt nothing. Under oath, Stangl defined the mass murder as a purely technical procedure. 3,500 women. They signed state contracts as auxiliary staff. Just like Stangl, these female guards entered the extermination network not out of innate sadism. They came for the lucrative salaries provided by the SS. The regime required thousands of camp operators. Recruitment targeted a specific demographic: working-class backgrounds, factory hands, maids. The state offered them a new professional title, Aufseherin, female overseer. The primary incentive was strictly economic. The starting monthly salary for an Aufseherin stood at 105 Reichsmarks. This rate fundamentally shifted their social standing, significantly exceeding the wages a woman could ever earn on a civilian assembly line. The SS denied them official military membership. Bureaucrats classified these women as standard civilian employees. Yet inside the barbed wire, the administration granted them absolute authority over human lives. They simply traded grueling factory shifts for a state-sponsored monopoly on violence. Camp headquarters processed their paperwork without delay. After signing the formal employment contracts, the new hires immediately began a rigid operational program of ideological indoctrination. The indoctrination worked flawlessly. Elfriede Rinkel was one of those 3,500 civilian recruits. Born in Leipzig in 1922, her life perfectly illustrates the massive structural failure of post-war justice. She arrived at Ravensbrück. The SS designed this facility exclusively for females. It consumed 130,000 women and girls. Rinkel patrolled the perimeter. A trained German shepherd strained against her leather leash. She routinely released the animal on starving prisoners. She watched teeth tear into flesh. Then she signed her timesheet. The Reich collapsed. Rinkel simply discarded her uniform. She vanished into the civilian masses. By 1959, she stood before an American consular officer. She filled out a standard immigration form. She left the wartime employment history section completely blank. The international tracking system failed. Bureaucrats approved her paperwork. Rinkel moved to San Francisco. She even married a German Jew who had narrowly escaped the Holocaust. He never knew her secret. The former camp guard spent decades attending Jewish charity events. The silence lasted until 2004. The Office of Special Investigations at the Department of Justice changed the rules. Agents initiated a massive cross-reference protocol. They fed millions of incoming immigration records into new digital databases. They matched them against recently declassified SS salary ledgers recovered from Ravensbrück. The algorithm found a direct hit. The visa application from 1959 perfectly matched the Nazi payroll signature. The government immediately moved to strip her citizenship. A heavy thud of a deportation stamp hit her final documents in 2006. Authorities expelled her to Germany. Yet the German legal bureaucracy stalled. Prosecutors cited expired statutes of limitations for auxiliary personnel. No tribunal ever summoned her. She died in 2018 at the age of 96. In 1939, the architects of the Third Reich realized a grim truth. To systematically annihilate millions, bullets were not enough. They needed flawless document flow. How do you manage a death conveyor for millions of people? Through a rigid structure of 7 specialized administrative departments. Heinrich Himmler established the Reich Main Security Office, the RSHA. It operated exactly like a corporate syndicate. No bloody hands, just desks. Over 3,000 clerks occupied the primary headquarters on Prinz Albrechtstrasse in Berlin. The corridors echoed with one constant sound: the relentless, dry clatter of typewriters. Clerks blindly struck the keys. They drafted extermination schedules. Every approved memo and logistical chart systematically transformed living populations into easily manageable inventory items. In 1942, Berlin transferred command of this entire agency to a new chief. You might expect the state to transport its victims secretly and cover the staggering logistical costs. The reality was purely commercial. Deportees financed their own destruction. They bought one-way train tickets. The Reichsbahn charged standard third-class passenger rates. 4 pfennigs per track kilometer, half price for young children. Infants traveled for free. To manage this continental traffic, the 7 departments of the RSHA synchronized daily with civilian infrastructure. The state railway system became their primary logistical partner. Civilian executives gathered in Berlin conference rooms. They unrolled massive railway maps across long oak tables. Pencils traced the most efficient transit routes. Officials verified departure schedules. They approved the final billing tariffs. Heavy official ink stamps slammed down on transport waybills. Blue ink sealed the invoices. A standard passenger carriage comfortably seated 40 people. The railway management ignored this metric. Guards shoved 100 to 120 people into unventilated wooden freight cars. No water, no air, just raw density. Official railway ledgers recorded these living passengers simply as cargo units. The financial extraction expanded far beyond rail fares. The death machinery demanded absolute administrative precision. Clerks meticulously weighed thousands of kilograms of extracted dental gold. Foundries melted the crowns into standard ingots. The National Bank then deposited this wealth into SS accounts under the fictitious name of Max Heiliger. Bureaucrats eliminated moral distance through paperwork. They spoke only of resettlement and special treatment. They transformed mass murder into a perfectly synchronized commercial transaction. Every single deportation mandate generated exactly 14 carbon copies. In January 1943, this avalanche of carbon copies found a new master. Ernst Kaltenbrunner took absolute command of the RSHA. His structural grip spanned the entire Reich. He simultaneously controlled the Gestapo, the criminal police, and the security service. 3 separate intelligence empires. Every interrogation report and deportation schedule funneled directly to his desk at Prinz Albrechtstrasse. Death became a strict metric. Kaltenbrunner turned mass extermination into daily productivity data. The paperwork tracked every operational consumable, bullets fired, poison gas utilized, mortality rates across transit hubs. Clerks compiled daily administrative summaries featuring precise calculations of extracted gold crowns, weighed down to the exact gram. Human lives translated into routine performance indicators. The chief statistician monitored the throughput of the extermination camps just like a factory manager. At the Nuremberg trials, he denied the mechanics. He claimed total ignorance of the slaughter. But the paper trail trapped him. Archival documents carried his direct signature. Logs confirmed his physical presence at the Mauthausen camp. He stood by the concrete walls and personally observed the gas chambers in full operation. The Nuremberg tribunal sentenced him for crimes against humanity. Guards hanged him in October 1946. While Kaltenbrunner compiled death metrics in Berlin, the physical geometry of murder required field engineers. Alois Brunner built the machine. 48,000 people vanished from the earth in 5 months. How do you deport 48,000 people in 5 months? By turning genocide into strict railway logistics. Brunner viewed human beings as standard freight. He optimized routes. He calculated axle loads. Operations at the Drancy transit camp in France ran like a flawless conveyor belt, without a single logistical bottleneck. Trains departed on exact timetables. He shoved 130,000 Jews into his meticulously designed network across Europe. His transport engineering reached its peak in Greece. March 1943. The Thessaloniki rail yard. Guards calculated the precise minute of train arrivals. Officers checked embarkation lists against a ticking stopwatch. Soldiers packed every freight wagon to maximum physical capacity. He funneled 48,000 Sephardic Jews into these trains. These victims comprised nearly a fifth of the city's total population. Cargo manifests swallowed a 2,000-year-old culture. But railway grids had limits. Eastern territories lacked stationary camp infrastructure. Brunner adapted the mechanics of death. Technicians modified heavy transport trucks. Mechanics sealed the rear compartments and rerouted the exhaust pipes. The driver engaged the transmission. The modified engine produced a low, rhythmic hum. Steel pipes pumped thick carbon monoxide directly into the sealed cabin. The transport route itself became the execution chamber. This mobile infrastructure murdered thousands. Yet the chief engineer survived the Reich. Brunner escaped through the rat lines to Syria. He secured protection under the Assad regime. Mossad agents mailed him explosive packages. Detonations tore off his fingers and destroyed his eye. But international justice never reached him.
The year was 2001. He died quietly in Damascus.
Brunner optimized the rolling stock, but his transport network required anchor points on the ground, transit hubs. The exact same administrative coldness dictated the daily routine at Theresienstadt. Propaganda painted the site as a model settlement. Reality proved otherwise. It functioned as a massive sorting facility. Here, Hildegard Neumann managed the inventory. People ceased to be individuals. They became statistical units. The sorting process ran flawlessly. No shouts, no overt violence, just a desk and a pen. The crisp rustle of thick paper filled her office. Neumann compiled the daily manifests. She prioritized children and the elderly for the next transport. Every name and transit code appeared in elegant calligraphic handwriting. She crossed out lives with absolute indifference. The registry required pure accuracy. Empathy had no place in the workflow. Routine bureaucracy operated far more efficiently than street-level sadism. The ledger recorded the exact throughput. 140,000 people passed through the Theresienstadt gates. Starvation and disease claimed 33,000 inside the walls. The meticulously filled paperwork sent another 90,000 directly to their deaths in the extermination camps. Before the front line collapsed, Neumann vanished. The regime dissolved. The administrator survived. She adopted a false identity. She relocated to West Germany. She started a family. She even returned to her familiar element, securing a clerical position in a local government office. Sorting civilian records, justice never caught up with her. She lived completely undisturbed and died at the age of 92. 500,000 dead women. The prisoners Hildegard Neumann cataloged in Theresienstadt met Chief Supervisor Maria Mandl at their final destination, Auschwitz-Birkenau. The unloading ramp. Mandl's personal death toll exceeds the total combat losses of the United States military during the entire Second World War. A freight train rolled into the station. Heavy iron brakes screeched against the steel tracks. The cattle car doors slid open. Mandl stood on the concrete platform. She directed the human flow with short, precise hand gestures. Left. Right. Temporary labor. Immediate gas. Behind her stood an anomaly. A fully equipped women's orchestra played symphonies of Mozart and Schubert. Before the war, classical music signified high culture. On this ramp, it functioned strictly as an acoustic weapon. The upbeat melodies masked the screams coming from the sorting lines. The familiar rhythm suppressed panic. It kept the crowd docile. Pure administrative logistics. The extermination conveyor demanded maximum efficiency because panic slowed down the entire cycle. Mandl selected prisoners with formal musical training and forced them to perform. Alma Rose, niece of Gustav Mahler, conducted the ensemble. The musicians played while thousands marched directly to the chambers. No delays, no riots, just a steady flow of human inventory moving to the beat of a waltz. American troops eventually broke the system and arrested the supervisor. A Polish tribunal sentenced her to death. In 1948, an executioner inside Montelupich prison in Krakow pulled the lever of the gallows. While Maria Mandl managed the sorting process on the Auschwitz ramp, the camps required a steady flow of human cargo. General Wilhelm Kluge ensured the supply from occupied Poland. 50 to 100 civilian lives for a single dead German. How do you suppress the resistance of an entire country? With the formula of collective responsibility. In 1939, Kluge took absolute command of regional security. The occupation followed strict mathematics. A partisan ambush leaves one soldier dead. The precinct records the loss. Officers open the local registries. They pull random names from the civilian lists. Clerks draft the execution order. The commander signs it. The stamp falls. By morning, printed death warrants appear on the streets. Fresh glue shines on the brick walls of Polish cities. Black ink announces the exact body count. Kluge met the quotas perfectly. The military command then scaled the mechanics of terror. Kluge launched the AB Aktion to eliminate the Polish elite. Firing squads executed over 30,000 intellectuals in 1940. Priests, teachers, mayors. These people formed the administrative backbone of the pre-war state. Kluge culturally decapitated the nation. He destroyed its capacity for self-government. The administration targeted the bloodline next. SS units implemented a forced Germanization program, kidnapping thousands of Polish children with Aryan features for relocation to the Reich.
Kruger's terror followed a strict mathematical blueprint. It was site clearance.
The administration executed a total demographic reconfiguration across occupied Poland. They started with the cities. SS units built rigid perimeters. They locked the Jewish population inside isolated urban ghettos. Administrators calculated starvation and typhus as primary tools for rapid population reduction, turning urban centers into vast demographic processing facilities. The ghetto served as a temporary holding zone before complete physical elimination. Then the blueprint expanded. The state activated the N4ZIS program. This specific directive transformed systemic genocide into a colossal real estate and agricultural land management operation for the Reich. SS logistics divisions seized massive territorial funds. They evicted hundreds of thousands of Slavic farmers from their ancestral properties. The administration reduced the surviving indigenous population to a manual slave workforce. Empty houses awaited new owners. Trains brought ethnically approved German colonists to take over the stolen infrastructure. Total impunity fueled the machine. Kruger bypassed standard tribunals. He delivered his demographic reports directly to Heinrich Himmler. The occupation forces operated entirely outside international law, stripping the region of any traditional rules of military engagement. Absolute power merged with a fanatical biological doctrine. The state normalized slaughter. The bureaucratic structure dissolved individual guilt. Ordinary men became daily executioners.
Commanders required a specialized tool to clear occupied land in Poland and the Soviet Union. Theodor Eicke built this machine not for combat, but for extermination. The SS Totenkopf Division, the Death's Head. He pulled guards straight from the concentration camps. Men already trained to view humans as biological waste became a mobile killing force. Operation Barbarossa launched. Totenkopf moved east into Ukraine and Belarus. Regular army units sometimes hesitated at the edge of mass graves. Totenkopf did not. Soldiers executed all adult men in suspect villages. They deported women. They deported children. Commanders treated mass murder as a measurable production quota. Soviet and Allied investigators later uncovered their daily routines. Officers hosted macabre competitions. Squads raced to maximize their body counts. Efficiency was everything. The headquarters institutionalized the bloodshed. A captured non-commissioned officer confessed how superiors rewarded the killers. Executioners received special leave tickets for high output during punitive operations.
A clerk stamped the white paper with wet black ink. A distinct skull and crossbones emblem. It guaranteed a trip home. Murder earned vacation days. When the mobile extermination squads reached their limits, Totenkopf stepped in. The division deployed its heavily armed guards to secure the execution perimeters while the Einsatzgruppen shot the victims.
Thousands of female overseers operated as direct cogs in the SS extermination machine.
During the war, these guards actively competed with their male colleagues. They demonstrated extreme brutality to secure high positions within the camp hierarchy. Yet post-war justice suffered a massive system failure. Jump forward to the courtrooms of the 1950s. Male judges presided over the post-war tribunals. Patriarchal stereotypes completely warped the legal process. The magistrates looked at the female defendants and saw only traditional caregivers or misguided followers. Out of the thousands of women who guarded the camps, tribunals prosecuted only a few dozen. The camp bureaucracy functioned as an impenetrable legal shield. Because the SS fragmented the extermination process into minor administrative tasks, these women left no direct execution orders bearing their personal signatures. Responsibility dissolved into endless paperwork. Most walked away completely free. Post-war archival records established a definitive reality. The human capacity for extreme cruelty possesses absolutely no gender. Post-war tribunals missed thousands of female guards. The officers of the Death's Head Division also evaded the gallows. They built the strict logistics of terror in the East. Friedrich Wilhelm Krüger directed this specific apparatus. He commanded security forces across Poland and Austria. He ordered summary executions until the final days of the Reich. Then the front line collapsed. Krüger's empire shattered. His subordinates adapted immediately. They activated the rat lines. Smugglers forged International Committee of the Red Cross passports. Heavy metal stamps hit fresh paper. Former SS officers boarded passenger steamers in Genoa. They sailed across the Atlantic to South America. This global extraction route functioned flawlessly. It relied on massive institutional complicity. But many executioners never left Europe. The Cold War dictated new geopolitical rules. Western allies needed experienced anti-communist operatives. Intelligence agencies prioritized recruitment over prosecution. A brutal operational background became a highly valuable asset. Handlers physically relocated old SS dossiers. They slipped the fading pages into the crisp, clean folders of new Western security bureaus. The post-war purge did not destroy the architects of genocide. Modern governments simply absorbed their administrative efficiency. Krüger missed this global assimilation. He pulled the trigger in May 1945. The annihilation machine did not hunt for maniacs. It required predictable operators. The camps functioned as psychological assembly lines. They manufactured sadists out of average citizens. How did the system force ordinary citizens to mass torture people? The answer relies on the precise architecture of absolute power and guaranteed impunity. The behavioral formatting started on day one. A recruit received his gray uniform. He buttoned the collar. A clerk processed the deployment papers. The dry knock of a rubber stamp echoed across the desk. That ink mark granted total jurisdiction over human life. The new guard stepped into the compound. He observed the complete absence of legal boundaries. He delivered his first strike against an inmate. No reprimand followed. The violence generated zero consequences. The psychological threshold vanished. Clinical psychopaths held no value for this logistics network. They lacked discipline. Instead, Inspector Theodor Eicke engineered a specialized curriculum at Dachau. He weaponized rigid ideology to systematically sever human empathy. This mechanism required zero innate cruelty. In 1971, the Stanford prison experiment validated this exact analytical model. Researchers gave standard college students guard uniforms. They removed external oversight. They granted them unchecked authority. Systemic moral degradation took root immediately. The extreme behavioral shift forced scientists to terminate the study in just 6 days. The Third Reich scaled this psychological algorithm to an industrial level. The SS maintained their operational model for 12 years. Theodor Eicke codified this exact mechanism into the structural design of the terror apparatus. The terror apparatus required a precise intake protocol to format the guards' minds. The mechanism engaged right at the arrival ramp. A person stepped off the train with suitcases, a profession, and a name. Minutes later, the system processed them into a naked biological asset. Beyond the barbed wire and watchtowers, identity posed an operational hazard. Camp administrators stripped it away methodically. Hair fell. Clothes vanished. In Auschwitz alone, roughly 1.3 million individuals underwent this exact registration procedure. They entered the brick buildings as human beings. They exited as inventory units, tracked only by a tattooed number. This erasure operated as a mandatory technological step. It dismantled the moral barriers of the personnel. An SS guard could not empathize with a disposable object. Total deprivation of identity transformed murder from a crime into a routine logistical task. Absolute authority merged with a deliberate absence of consequences.
Pathology mutated into the daily operational standard. Violence lost its original instrumental function. It became a daily routine. Camp commandants officially rewarded guards with extra leave and rapid promotions for acts of extreme brutality. The stripping of identity turned inmates into raw material. It allowed the SS to engineer violence into a measurable sport. At Treblinka, guards treated infants as sporting equipment. They threw babies high into the air, then they raised their rifles. They fired at them like clay pigeons. Survivor Jankiel Viernik watched the officers keep score, turning the massacre into a competitive shooting range. This psychological theater shaped the daily camp routine. Auschwitz chief supervisor Maria Mandel institutionalized the pressure. She formed a female camp orchestra. Musically trained prisoners had to perform on command. A crisp, rhythmic Mozart or Schubert melody cut through the heavy air. Women in striped uniforms played classical symphonies, while columns of doomed inmates marched directly to the gas chambers. The upbeat tempo stabilized the walking pace. It prevented panic. It streamlined the industrial slaughter. Violence required strict metrics. 186 steep, jagged steps. The Mauthausen concentration camp introduced stopwatches to measure death. The Wiener Graben quarry operated as a testing ground for human endurance. An emaciated prisoner lifted a 50-kilogram block of solid granite. He approached the quarry ascent. A guard stood at the top edge. He clicked his silver stopwatch. The prisoner began to climb. The engineers designed the stairs of death for failure. They carved the steps with completely irregular heights. The uneven terrain intentionally broke the climber's physical rhythm. Legs gave out. The prisoner dropped the massive stone, crushing the men below. The guards tracked the times. They executed the slowest climbers instantly. The ascent offered no survival. The staircase held exactly 186. Beyond the stopwatch entertainment, the camp system demanded biological inventory. Doctors treated dead bodies as a raw material base for research catalogs. Why did the Buchenwald doctor need 40 pieces of human skin? Eric Wagner was writing an academic treatise on them. The extraction followed strict clinical protocols. Guards inspected incoming transports for distinctive tattoos. Selection was fast. Firing squads executed the marked targets. Medical staff excised the tissue. The pages turned with the dry rustle of tanned human skin, stitched neatly into academic ledgers. Wagner organized the material like a botanical collection. He submitted this portfolio directly to the University of Jena. The harvesting scaled up. In Belzec, Christian Wirth curated his own anatomical displays. During the destruction of Warsaw, Jürgen Stroop collected human fragments as field trophies. Camp commanders repurposed the dead. Aides polished skulls into heavy desk paperweights. Tailors stitched treated epidermis into gloves. Humans became biological samples. She strolled through the camp half naked. Starving prisoners stared at the dirt. One accidental glance guaranteed a brutal beating. The biological inventory had evolved beyond state research. Karl Otto Koch commanded Buchenwald. His wife Ilse Koch bypassed the official bureaucratic channels and transformed his territory into a private materials catalog. Absolute power bred a personalized monopoly on death. She conducted her own selections. She did not look for health. She hunted for ink. Guards stripped inmates for inspection. She specifically targeted men with intricate tattoos. SS men executed the chosen prisoners immediately. Camp craftsmen harvested the treated tissue. They stretched the tattooed canvas over desk lampshades. They bound her personal books in human skin. Decorative objects, bespoke murder. This macabre hoarding left a physical trail. The private collection survived the collapse of the regime. American prosecutors laid the harvested skin out on courtroom tables, turning her personal catalog into undeniable proof.
It became the primary material evidence at the 1947 Buchenwald trial. The military court handed down a life sentence. She hanged herself in a Bavarian women's prison cell in 1967. The commodification of human beings extended far beyond the dead. The Reich broadcasted absolute racial purity. Propaganda heavily preached strict moral hygiene, but behind the barbed wire, the reality completely inverted. In 1942, Heinrich Himmler officially integrated a system of sexual exploitation into the camp infrastructure. A leather folder sat on the central desk. Himmler signed the directive. A clerk applied the ink. The heavy metallic thud of the stamp legalized the new establishments on camp territory. Bureaucrats immediately allocated specific barracks. They distributed exact operational quotas for client visits. It was a meticulously calculated incentive system designed to boost forced labor output across the industrial zones. The SS charged privileged prisoners 2 Reichsmarks for entry, turning systemic rape into a highly profitable state revenue stream. Administrators required biological material to stock this new economic sector. Officers selected women from Ravensbrück, pulling them from hard labor with false promises of early release. They transferred roughly 400 prisoners across the network. The system commodified them completely. Each woman had to service dozens of clients daily. Disease spread rapidly. Exhaustion crushed them. The mechanical degradation spared no one. At Buchenwald and Sachsenhausen, male prisoners faced identical institutionalized violence. Guards and capos specifically targeted inmates marked with the pink triangle. Commanders used homosexual men as disposable objects for domination and nightly entertainment. Pregnancy disrupted the rigid operational efficiency of the special barracks. Camp doctors performed crude forced abortions directly on the concrete floors. Guards marched the pregnant survivors straight to the gas chambers. In May 1945, the extermination mechanism stopped. The Allies had to invent a completely new legal terminology to process industrial-scale crimes. To build the prosecution, investigators examined over 100,000 captured German documents, invoices, death registries, transport manifests. Prosecutors mapped the precise bureaucracy of the Reich. Murder was no longer an abstract concept. It was a documented state enterprise. From 1945 to 1949, international justice took its first steps at Nuremberg. The tribunal targeted the absolute top of the command chain. 22 leaders sat in the dock: Hermann Göring, Rudolf Hess, Joachim von Ribbentrop. The men who designed the machine now faced the mechanics of the law. The judges handed down 11 death sentences. The architects of the genocide faced the hangman. In the courtroom, the defense relied on one standard shield. The defendants insisted they were simply following orders. The tribunal legally shattered this argument. The judges ruled that an illegal military directive provided no legal cover for atrocities. The chain of command was no longer an alibi. Nuremberg delivered a fundamental precedent, but mathematically, the retribution barely scratched the surface. The gallows claimed a fraction of the elite leadership, while the actual criminal apparatus of the Third Reich had actively integrated hundreds of thousands. In October 1946, the trap door opened. Ernst Kaltenbrunner hanged. The paper logistics that fueled the death camps became his ultimate executioner. As head of the RSHA, he managed a vast shadow empire. Kaltenbrunner controlled a network of over 50,000 Gestapo and SD personnel. The mechanism required endless administration, decrees, memos, schedules. Every single casualty demanded a typed authorization, turning the industrial slaughter into a rigorously documented administrative process. At Nuremberg, he deployed the standard evasion strategy: plausible deniability. He blamed his subordinates. He claimed he merely processed intelligence far from the actual killing zones. The tribunal ignored his words. Investigators tracked the ink. They traced his exact signatures directly to extermination orders. The bureaucratic trail systematically dismantled his chain of command alibi. But his strategy completely collapsed under a different kind of record. Facility logs confirmed his direct physical presence at the extermination sites. He had personally visited the Mauthausen gas chambers to watch the executions. While functionaries like Ernst Kaltenbrunner dropped through the gallows trapdoor, others simply vanished. They plugged into a transnational relocation machine. The rat lines. This was a calculated logistics network. Smugglers, sympathetic clerics within the Catholic Church, and former SS officers built the transit routes. But they had powerful, silent partners. In the late 1940s, the United States Counterintelligence Corps urgently needed anti-Soviet data. Agents actively recruited former Gestapo officers. They provided cover and safe passage in exchange for intelligence. How did the organizer of the deportation of 130,000 people escape the tribunal? He became a valuable asset for Syrian intelligence. Alois Brunner boarded a merchant ship to leave Europe behind. He arrived safely in Damascus. The regime of Hafez Assad offered him absolute protection. Brunner shed his old identity. He stepped out as Georg Fischer. He did not hide in the shadows. He went straight to work. As a highly valued government advisor, he trained Syrian security forces in the exact interrogation methods he had perfected in Europe. He shared his blueprints for systematic repression. 130,000 deported victims against 2 mail bombs. Mossad operatives eventually tracked his location. A courier delivered a standard parcel to his desk. Brunner tore the thick envelope open. A deafening crack shattered the room. Acrid white smoke and the sharp smell of burnt cordite filled his office. The blast ripped off several fingers and permanently blinded his left eye. Blood soaked the paperwork, but he survived. A second explosive package followed years later. It also failed to kill him. France condemned him in absentia. Extradition requests hit a solid political wall. The geopolitical shield held firm. Brunner lived out his days in the Syrian capital. He died around 2001. He was 89 years old. He never faced a judge. The transnational escape infrastructure allowed the supreme architects of the system to vanish into South America. Adolf Eichmann and Joseph Mengele bypassed military checkpoints using a simple piece of paper. A standard travel document, stamped by the International Committee of the Red Cross, issued to a man named Ricardo Clement. After the war, the Red Cross printed around 120,000 of these refugee passports. The system was blind. It offered a blank slate. Fugitive officers exploited this logistical loophole on a massive scale, turning a humanitarian mechanism into a shield. By 1950, Eichmann secured his route to Argentina. He abandoned his past. He became Ricardo Clement. He settled in Buenos Aires and put on a cheap suit. He walked into a local Mercedes-Benz factory, an ordinary clerk blending into the daily grind. Commute, paperwork, evening routine. The chief logistical engineer of the Holocaust achieved a perfect operational dissolution. 10 years passed. Then came 1960. Mossad operatives mapped his routine and closed the trap. They snatched Clement off the street and smuggled him to Israel. The manhunt became a public spectacle. Black and white television static flickered across international broadcasts. In the center of the frame sat Eichmann, trapped inside a bulletproof glass booth, a dry bureaucrat listening through heavy headphones, surrounded by the mechanical hum of cameras. The capture looked like a systemic triumph, but the global pursuit grid was severely flawed. For every operational success, dozens of targets evaporated. Joseph Mengele proved the failure of the manhunt mechanics. The chief medical officer of Auschwitz crossed the Atlantic and dissolved completely. He shifted coordinates, from Argentina to Paraguay, then deep into the urban sprawl of Brazil. Intelligence agencies drafted capture protocols. Governments announced multi-million-dollar bounties. The hunt spanned decades. Zero results. The Ghost Network held firm. Mengele never saw a courtroom. He drowned off a Brazilian coast in 1979. the most wanted fugitive on Earth simply died on a beach. The operational pursuit ended in the dirt. Pathologists opened an anonymous grave. Forensic teams extracted the skeleton and definitively identified Mengele in 1985.
But not everyone needed an underground network to vanish. Ravensbrück guard Elfriede Rinkel simply immigrated to the United States in 1959. She settled in San Francisco. She married a German Jew, a man who had barely survived the Holocaust. He lived his entire life never knowing his wife used to set SS dogs on starving prisoners. The executioners integrated seamlessly into democratic societies. In 1979, the U.S. Department of Justice established the Office of Special Investigations. Agents began hunting the perpetrators hiding in plain sight. They found monsters working everyday jobs. John Demjanjuk spent decades fixing cars as an auto mechanic in Cleveland. Klaus Barbie transitioned from Gestapo torturer to an active asset for U.S. intelligence. Rinkel kept her secret safe in California for almost 50 years. Authorities finally exposed her true identity in 2004. They deported her. But the aging woman never faced a judge. She died free in 2018. Her case was not unique. Investigators eventually found Hermine Braunsteiner, a guard who crushed babies to death, living as a simple housewife in Queens. Discovering former executioners hiding in plain sight across Queens and Cleveland forced lawyers to rewrite the algorithm. The old justice system demanded a smoking gun. Prosecutors needed an eyewitness to a specific murder. For decades, independent researchers fought this legal barrier. Simon Wiesenthal hunted fugitives across continents. Investigators Beat and Serge Klarsfeld spent their lives mapping out the escape networks. They tracked down hundreds. But the demographic clock was ticking. Witnesses died. Paperwork degraded. The executioners turned into ordinary pensioners. To catch them, the justice system had to rewrite its own code. In 2011, Germany fundamentally revised the legal principle of complicity. The court introduced a radical innovation. Mere physical presence inside the perimeter of an extermination camp equated to direct responsibility for genocide. The John Demjanjuk trial created the ultimate precedent. It allowed prosecutors to immediately indict over a dozen former guards. Without evidence of specific murders, the old legal framework had previously considered them absolutely untouchable. The law stopped looking for the trigger puller. It put the camp mechanism itself on trial. Oscar Goerning only sorted stolen banknotes on the Auschwitz platform. He never killed anyone directly. Under the new doctrine, it meant nothing. The court sentenced him anyway. Yet the demographic clock still won. For every one convicted operator of the death machine, hundreds died peacefully of old age.